All right. Welcome, everyone. We'll just wait a few minutes to give folks a chance to join. Welcome. All right. So wonderful. I think we can go ahead and get started. Hello. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Frances Sadi, and I am the Associate Director of Non-Degree Programs at the Brown University School of Professional Studies. We're so excited that you've chosen to join us today for this timely and salient masterclass on enhancing executive presence. And we hope that at the end of today's talk, you would consider partnering with us for all of your leadership needs. So whether you're looking to develop your own executive leadership skills or are hoping to explore new and innovative ways to unlock leadership challenges that your organization is facing now or potentially in the future, we're confident that we have a program fit for you. So before I hand things over to our incredible faculty lead, Ed Barrows, I'd like to take a moment to give you a very brief overview of our programming. So our mission here at the Brown University School of Professional Studies is to empower you with the skills, resources, and networks that you need in order to change the way the world works for good. So every year, Gallup does an employee engagement survey where they uncover the latest trends of the US and global workforce. So in their latest report, they found that nearly 70% of the US workforce is not engaged at work, which is incredibly alarming, particularly when you consider that many of us spend over half our waking lives at our jobs. And then to add to that is the fact that since the pandemic, workers continue to report record high levels of stress, sadness, and anxiety, a trend that I was surprised to find out has actually been on the rise over the last decade. So this was even pre-pandemic. And so we know that there's this huge gap between what our needs are at work and how our current leadership does or does not address those needs. And as the report highlights, they write, many factors influence stress, but Gallup finds that managers play an outsized role in the stress that workers feel on the job, which influences their daily stress overall. And if you haven't already checked it out, I highly encourage you to read this recent article that came out in the Harvard Business Review by Sylvia Ann Hewlett. And I believe Ed is going to talk about this a little bit. But in it, she talks about some redefining the terms of executive presence and what that means for how people are showing up at work. And so I won't spend much time on it because it's the topic of Ed's talk today. But I just wanted to point this out and encourage you to go check it out. And so here at the School of Professional Studies, we've made it our mission to help you build the skills and the confidence that you need in order to face the challenges of our modern world and the challenges that our modern world presents. And so in doing, hopefully, we also help you to grow into the leaders that can confidently and successfully guide us into the future in a more inclusive, productive, healthy, and engaged way. And so thank you again for being with us here today for our free masterclass on lessons in leadership. And so if you'd like to deepen your learning and want to check this out afterwards, we hope you do, we invite you to partner with us. So here at Brown School of Professional Studies, we offer many different paths to advance your professional career and to strengthen your organization and team. So to start, we have about 17 non-degree programs that range in size from longer certificate offerings to short classes to free master classes such as this one. And the topics include leadership skills, coaching, mindfulness, applied diversity, equity, and inclusion skills, effective communication, applied AI, and data science. And that portfolio is always growing, so there'll be even some new topics that we're going to explore later today. Additionally, we have 30 early career master's programs and a whole host of different topics. And then we also offer 3 professional master's programs with low residency requirements. So this includes our executive MBA program, our master's in healthcare leadership, and our master in technology leadership. So all three of these programs are offered in many different formats, which allows them to really fit into your busy lifestyle and career. So as you can see here on this slide, our program offerings fall mostly into three main categories. So that would be executive training, um, leadership and executive training, healthcare, and then data and technology. And then at the intersection of those three, we can also build custom programming for you and your organization. So our program offerings are catered to meet your leadership needs at every stage of your career. So whether you're early career, mid-career, or at a senior level, we're here to help support you and help meet your goals. And as I mentioned earlier, we also can offer a flexible delivery format. So that includes building programs to be online, in person, as well as having asynchronous content where you can access it on your own time, on demand. And lastly, you have the opportunity to influence the future of our portfolio, which we'll talk about more later. So at the end of today's session, after Ed has given us just a taste of what it's like to be in the School of Professional Studies classroom, I'll come back on the screen with a brief poll to ask for some feedback on what you'd like to see offered here at Brown. And before I introduce Ed, two quick housekeeping items. So first, we are recording today's session, and yes, we will send an email with the link to the recording and the slides as well. And second, if you have a question at any point during today's talk, don't wait until the end. Use the Q&A feature found at the bottom of your Zoom screen. Since we do have a lot of people on today's call, it's really helpful if you submit your questions kind of as the talk is unfolding. It helps me monitor what questions are coming up and just be able to then present them in a more efficient and effective way. And so with that, I'm honored to introduce and hand things over to our incredible faculty lead, Ed Barrows, who is a professor of the practice in leadership here at Brown School of Professional Studies. So you can see Ed's full bio is here. I'll only kind of highlight a few things. So for the past 25 years, Ed has worked with corporate and executive leaders at all levels, focusing in the areas of strategy, strategic leadership, and leadership development. He's an International Coaching Federation certified coach and a member of Harvard's Institute for Coaching. Prior to joining Brown, Ed worked as a managing director at Duke Corporate Education, where he was responsible for designing and delivering programs for a portfolio of global clients. He is also the co-author of two books, including one which he'll reference quite a bit today. But perhaps more than anything else, it was his time in the Marine Corps that allowed him to lay a strong foundation in leadership and to be truly the embodiment of executive presence. But I'll let him speak to that point. And as always, I'm so grateful to have you here today. Thank you for making space to speak to us on enhancing executive education.
Yeah, thanks, Fran. Appreciate it. These intros they're a little bit much. I appreciate the kind words, but it's great to see everybody. We'll go ahead and dive into things. And Fran, thanks for telling everybody a little bit about what we're doing. Let's jump into the topic of executive presence. And I'm going to push through to get to some bits I think you'll find interesting. We encourage participation on this, but we're doing our welcome. I'll just talk about lessons in leadership of this series very briefly. Most of you are familiar with this if you've been on before, but just for those folks who might be new, we'll hit 12 skills very quickly, but then we'll get into the meat of today, and that'll be the bulk of our discussion around enhancing executive presence, which is a hot topic today. So we have a whole raft of things on our lessons in leadership portion of our website. So I just took some screenshots so you can see we have these events. Let's talk core leadership skills every month, all year. So please take a look at that. We've also been putting out with Fran's help and the rest of the team, some good thinking on this. There's some blog posts, some articles we're writing. You might just want to check in and see what those say, because you might find some additional tips that you can use. So on the 12 skills, Fran talked about the book that my colleague Lauren Downing and I put together, just to recap, because people have seen this. So 12 skills, we're going to talk about executive presence today. It's really divided into these 6 areas and these 12 individual skills. We're doing 1 skill a month. So we've wrapped up strategy, and now we're working through communication, as you can see, to the 3 o'clock position. We're talking about executive presence and then going to clear messaging. And there's a whole host of resources. If you want to, we have a workbook that's free. Just go to the 12 skills site and go to the bottom. You'll see workbook on Executive Presence. You can download that. If there's anything you want to do on your own or with your team, you'll find that to be hopefully quite interesting. Check back regularly. There's also a LinkedIn group if you want to join a discussion on the topic. So why executive presence? I update this. I show this graphic every time we talk, but I also update it so it's pertinent to the things that we're going to be discussing on the topic today. So there's greater ambiguity at work. There's more technology that's ever been adapted before. As one of my colleagues was saying, it's going to really change the game. Gen AI is truly a game changer as we're seeing that play out before us. We have more generations. I heard just yesterday from a colleague, 6 different generations in the workforce. It seems hard to believe. There's greater diversity than ever before. People are working in different locations. They're working virtually, hybrid, in person, globally. Everyone who's on this call is probably dialing in from different time zones in different places. So the workforce is also dynamic. People are not necessarily staying in jobs as frequently as they used to. For that creates a challenge for leaders then to make sure they're creating an environment where people want to stay. And also there's a major push. PwC, I think I referenced this last month, is put out on their annual CEO survey that preponderance of organizations are going through some type of transformation that requires us to demonstrate our effectiveness in terms of leadership. So why is executive presence important? And I'll even throw that out for the chat if you'd like to join in. Just feel free to say why you think executive presence is important. Now, you may not be persuaded that it is, but for those that are, feel free to put it in the chat and we'll see what some of the responses are. But there's been a lot of, I'll say, ink spilled, even recently in this area. Sylvia Hewitt, that Fran talked about at the outset, has a book on executive presence. My colleague Laura and I have distilled that down into, kind of what you need to know and what we think is a fairly useful but straightforward framework on the topic. But it begs the question, why is this important? So, to Cindy's point, it's how you carry yourself as a leader within your organization. It's I think there's always a question of, do you really need this? Somebody has to be in charge of it. Tyrannical issues. Some of these are pretty interesting. We tend to like to, believe it or not, we gravitate for better or worse toward leaders that have executive presence. As you saw the criteria on the slide there, Fran showed some level of gravitas. And it's true, this article from Sylvia Hewitt, which just dropped within the last, I'd say, 30 or 60 days, it gives us, to Evelyn's point, a sense of this is what a good example of leadership looks like. So, but we always have to be careful with that. So I highly encourage you to check out the article and the content that we have in the book as well. Well, Victoria makes a good point about, does it keep organizations on track? I don't know about that, but we'll talk about it today. So what we want to cover in our discussion over the next 30 minutes or so is what this topic is all about and give you some thoughts and tools into how to build your executive presence. Instilling trust, to Mary's point, is an excellent one. So you want to be thinking about, as we go through this discussion, about your particular presence. We're going to really focus on you. We're going to think about what is it that you can do to build your executive presence. We're going to give you a sense of what you can do to gain some awareness of the image that you present at work. And you will have perhaps some different views on that, but I will give you mine and my colleagues. To project a greater sense of confidence and capability in the work that you do with your colleagues. And also, we're going to talk about how you can enhance your brand using executive presence. Now, I have done some teaching in the past on influence and persuasion on some formal courses, like semester-based courses. And the reason I bring that up is typically when I start that course with the students, there'll be a few students who will say this: I shouldn't have to use influence and persuasion at work. I think that I should be recognized at work for the quality of my work. Meaning, if I just do good work, I kind of focus on being the best colleague I can be, my good work will be recognized and rewarded. And usually what I tell people is, the world, this is usually shatters a few people's worldviews at the outset, and I think it's applicable to what we're talking about today. The world is not necessarily a fair place, despite what some of our parents may have told us, that if we just work hard, do a great job, keep our heads down, we'll get ahead. That is not usually the case, especially as you get more senior in organizations. It's going to be your ability not just to influence and persuade others, and we have that coming up as a topic toward the latter part of 2024, but embedded in that is the image that you present. So I think it's important. Now, you can disagree with me, and I encourage active disagreement. But the reality is, it doesn't necessarily obviate what I'm saying, but you can go through this discussion and make up your own mind. I won't try to change your views. I'll try to present information and the views that we have. So first, a quick test. How would you rate your executive presence today? And be honest and put it in the chat, Fran. I'm going to have people put it in the chat on this simple survey from 0 to 3, 0 big, not at all, 3 being significantly in these 3 different areas of executive presence that you think about your appearance at work. And one thing that I will not do today is tell you how you should look at work. I'm going to give you some concepts to think about. But assess yourself, how thoughtful are you about your appearance at work? Secondly, do you present a self-assured, kind of confident image? And then, how well do you think you communicate the concepts that you are communicating, whether it be, one-on-one in a meeting? So I see some 9s, some 6s, 5s. This is for you. We're not tracking this for any other purpose than just give yourself. So some people a little higher, some people a little lower, some people maybe not sure, and that's okay. Okay, that's if I would imagine that since we're close to maybe 300 people, there's some interest in the topic. And I will say that the topic is very popular today, although I think it's been around for quite a while. I know some of the larger schools teach it. We here at Brown in our programs that we do, custom programs for organizations, it's a topic that we're able to bring into organizations and help leaders in those organizations have more gravitas. But we also see it on short courses and the like. So I appreciate everyone's assessment. And I think being honest with yourself is a great place to start. Usually there's some tweaks or some adaptations we can make to enhance that. And I think earlier to mid-career is really when you want to think about this. So with that, I'm going to give you a little test. And I want to encourage your participation. But before you participate, I want to set some of the ground rules. But the question then becomes, what is executive presence? And you see over in the thought cloud some of the things that we put in here. Simply defined, and there's a lot of different definitions. And this is out of our book. Really, it's your ability to project a mature, self-confident image that you have some element of control over your situation, even when they're unpredictable, that you have the ability to make decisions, ideally in a timely way, based upon thoughtful consideration of what the implications are in some data if you have your decision. And I would say be on par with other people in your organization who can be sometimes strong-willed, and for better or worse, oftentimes those are the people that we find ourselves in situations with as we become more senior. But the challenge for people, as we're talking about today, is to sometimes think about what my image is and what I want it to be. And that may be for people, it may have varying levels of difficulty. And I don't say that in any critical way, other than to say, given our background or ethnicity, or where we come from, how we think about the world, back to my point that I made about not believing or wanting to believe that gravitas is important, oftentimes it's hard for us to change. It can be difficult for us to change who we are, who we're projecting. So I see Andy's point. Some leaders are filled with self-assuredness, even in some instances when perhaps they may not need to be or should be. Let me go back. Sorry about that. So I'd like you to think about, we typically do a little thought experiment at the outset. Think about someone that you've worked with in the past who kind of looks the part as someone who has gravitas, who has good executive presence. And believe it or not, we have a tendency in a general way to want leaders like this, whether it's good or bad. Right? We tend to want leaders who have some level of gravitas. So I'd like you to think about, what is it about this person that you think about? It could be a figure in your own organization. It could be a sort of celebrity, whatever, political figure, whatever makes sense for you. I'm asking you to think about, what is it about them that gives you a sense of they have strong executive presence? And you can feel free to put that in the chat as well. I'll take a drink of water while you're thinking. So what is it, if you think about that person, they project a feeling that they're interested when what you have to say. They have this calm sort of demeanor, well-dressed, strength. They command attention. I think that's a very good one that was put in there. Nicole says confidence. There's an element of compassion, right? You can also be compassionate. It's not just about gravitas all the time. There's an approachable aspect. Even some humility. You can have some gravitas and be humble at the same time. Empathy. I love the things that you're putting here. They listen first. So a lot of these characteristics are very specifically aligned with executive presence, but some are even beyond that. I love this sense of purpose. We hear that, a vision, which is somewhat aligned with purpose. So we all tend to know somebody that, or at least there's an element, what's called admiration for people in some respects who have these types of characteristics. Body language matters too. So thank you for that. So what I'd like you to do in this little experiment, and you'll have to indulge me for a moment, I'm gonna shift backward a little bit before we go forward, and I'm gonna ask you a question about this concept of brand. Okay, the model that we're going to use for thinking through executive presence and how to enhance your own, if you're so interested in doing, is these three, we'll call them variables. So one is around your appearance. It's how you present yourself in the workplace in terms of dress, your grooming. I even see this coming through from Esther, good posture. You know, those things tend to composite and, you know, work together to give you a sense of what your appearance is in the workplace. There's an element of boldness. When we talk about gravitas, it also links back to this idea of someone having confidence, being able to make a decision. Even in the face of difficult situations, that's when we oftentimes think we want someone who has that sense of what the future holds and how we ought to proceed given some challenging situations. Someone that is able to communicate effectively, express their ideas clearly and confidently. Now, some people might be saying, you know, this is just window dressing. If you have bad ideas or you just happen to be the first person that speaks up in the room, you shouldn't necessarily be rewarded for that. Fair point. Similarly, however, I think if you use this at least to understand what causes people to have this type of persona, it can be helpful to not only, I would say, adapt your own behavior, but get a sense of unpacking when is something just pure gravitas versus when it's something that's content underneath it. But here's what I want you to think about. Now, hold on before you respond. I've put up a picture of a person here. And I'm not asking you to opine as to the person's quality of their artistry. I'm not asking if you like the person. I'm not asking if you've been to a concert. Who is this, Jabari? You're always your humor, Jabari. If you know this person, if you don't, then I will tell you at the end. But one word that embodies this person's personal brand, like a brand is the set of imagery and words and descriptors that come up when you think about a person. Okay, so one word, put your researcher hat on, not whether you like the person or not. Okay, these are good. Creative, driven, advocate, powerful, interesting, right? Authentic. So the point of this is superficial. Yep, I knew there would be some that were perhaps not so favorable, but the reality is whether we like someone or not, and that's not what I'm asking you. When we see an image of somebody or think about a person, it conjures up a sense of what their brand is. Okay. And that's where I want to start today with asking you, what is it? And this, if you want to know where this picture came from, it came from an article on Boston University today. What makes this person a pop icon? And I think there's a lot that we can learn from some of these figures by just getting a sense of what are the things that they have done to create that image. Now, most of us probably don't aspire to be a pop icon. That being said, there's some secret sauce to what creates this, and that's what we want to try to understand today. So I'm going to give you some bad news up front on top of what I've said so far. I am not going to tell you how you should dress, how you should groom, how you specifically should act, how you specifically should communicate. We have some bits in the book, in the workbook on that. What I'm going to ask you to do is think about it. Okay. And then work to develop the kind of brand that works for you. And I think that's really important. We're going to give you, or I'm going to give you the principles and some of the practices. You will make the determination as to what you want to adopt or not adopt, right? I think that's really the ultimate goal, that we've been effective here at the end. So let's start with this concept of personal brand. What is it? There's a lot of different definitions out here. You can see the reference to it. It's a fairly recent article. I think it came out last year in February. Your personal brand it's this amalgamation of associations, beliefs, feelings, attitudes, expectations that people have about you. Now, some people will say, well, that's your reputation. And I tend to think that they're essentially the same. I've seen some literature that parses them out. But I think for simplicity purposes, all of us have, whether we like it or not, we have a personal brand. Okay. It's what people think of. And I have a little bit over here as well. It's almost like your trademark. And you can see the quote from Jeff Bezos. I like this because it's really what people say about you when you're not in the room. It's how do people think about you? What are the things, the images, the ideas, the perceptions that people have about you? And we're relegating this to work, but you can truly use it beyond the scope of the workplace. What do people think about you at work? What's their impression of you? Now, you may say, again, Ed, this is kind of hooey. I don't want to spend time talking about personal brand. And that's fine. Like it or not, every one of us has a personal brand at work and beyond. So the question then becomes, do we manage our brand? Do we understand what goes into creating that brand in terms of how visible we are at work, in terms of what our network looks like and who we're connected to? Does it give us access to new opportunities? Does it take advantage of our unique abilities as someone at work? And these are some of the elements I want you to think first and foremost about is this assessment. And that's why we did that little self-assessment a minute ago. What is your trademark? What is your personal brand? Because, most of you, some of you probably know the music of the artist that I showed before, but some of you may not, but you still formed an opinion about that person, rightly or wrongly. So the question is, what are you doing to A, understand what your brand is, and B, then manage that brand? And that's where the ABCs come in. So you have a current brand. And what I'm going to ask you to do today is think about that. But the real question once you do that is, what is it that you want your brand to be? If you were to manage it in any way, shape, or form, what are the things that people think about you that are admirable qualities? When you think about people you admire, what are the things that you like about them? When you think prospectively about what you want to be, what are the things that excite you in the workplace? What are you good at? What are you most proud of? Are you able to articulate that to people? When I was in the military, Fran, I appreciate the, I don't know if I learned all of my leadership lessons in the military, quite a few, but there was a phrase that used to get used when I was a young officer around, it was called polishing your shield. And it was similar to this. It was, just a military way of saying personal branding. And the idea is, were you one of those people that took the time to think about the image and the brand that you present? And in all organizations, I'd argue, your brand matters whether or not you're managing or not. What are the things that you want to build skill-wise? What are the tasks that you get energized by? What are the things that are of interest to you? And then, I think this one's useful in terms of when I think 5 or 10 years out, what is it that I want to be known for in the workplace? And again, I'm not going to give you the answer because this answer is unique to everybody, but I think it's useful to give some thought to what is it that you want people to know about you, and how is it that you want to move your career in the direction that enhances your brand, whatever it is you want it to be. Now, let's start with appearance. And again, I want to be clear. I'm not suggesting you should look a certain way, but appearance is about how you present in the workplace. And I'll give you a few thoughts on it. So whether or not we think about it this way, every workplace, I would argue, has a set of norms and standards. It's not just about your appearance, but it's about your behaviors as well. So when you come into a new job or you've been in a workplace for a while, you can probably get a sense of what are some of the things, how do people dress around here? Are they more casual? Are they more professional? Are there expectations when you're with customers or clients, or if you're working from home? All those different, I'll say, venues or forums factor into a set of expectations around your workplace. Now, more often than not, they're not necessarily listed in your workspaces too. It can even be that granular. But the first thing you need to understand when you go to work, and probably all of you do without necessarily thinking about it, is what are those standards? What are the things that in our organization are important? Now, we use an example in the book that Laura and I put together about one. My background is consulting and education. A colleague that went to an athletic shoe company to go to a meeting. And he showed up for a meeting about my age with kind of like I'm dressed. You had a Oxford shirt on, sport jacket, slacks, shoes. The person that was the internal client took one look at him and said, you cannot go into this meeting looking like I can't do it. So they took him down to the company store where he bought a sweatshirt. He got some athletic shoes that were the same brand as the company, and thus went into the meeting looking like one of the executives that he was facilitating the meeting for. Now, why do we tell that story? Because again, I want to be clear, it's not right or wrong, but there's oftentimes a set of expectations for who fits into, who can fit into that workplace, and that becomes norms and standards. The challenge for us as individuals is to try to understand what our own personal preferences and style is, and then ask ourselves, to what degree can I adapt that to the workplace? And I've had conversations with colleagues of varying backgrounds over the years. Will say, this is a really important aspect of who I am as a person, and I want it to go to work. And I say, that's fine. I'm not here to judge you on what you should or shouldn't do at work. But the question that I always ask people is really around this. Who is it that you want to be in the workplace from the standpoint of appearance? And that's something that you have to find this sort of melded area on this Venn diagram between what your personal style is and your preferences and your norms and standards in your workplace. And that can be pretty gray at times, right? That can be somewhat challenging. And I think just a few things, I would say the biggest tip I can encourage people to think about is this. Before you try to stand out, and I'm not suggesting you shouldn't try to, again, I appreciate whomever put it in the chat, polish your shield, Julie. You should have a sense of what everyone else's shields kind of look like. So before you try to stand out, make sure that you understand those norms and standards and rules, and you feel like you can fit in. Now, if you look at that and say, I don't think I can fit in there, or I don't want to make those adaptations, then you have to ask yourself, is that a workplace that I think I'll be happy in? And I think that's a reasonable question. But this gets into matters of, how do people dress at work? Is it professional? Is it casual? Is it business casual? There's so many variations on this. Is it casual? Is it creative or artistic? Do people have, like by example, is there an aspect of being athletic? In some cases, there is an actual uniform that one must wear if there's protective clothing. But you also have to ask this idea of, what are the things I probably shouldn't do? Like, is it okay to wear, I have teenagers, they wear ripped jeans as making a fashion statement, which doesn't bother me at all at home. I would ask them, is that something you're comfortable wearing to work or that your workplace encourages? Maybe it does. T-shirts, things of that like. And, fit matters. Do your clothes clean? Are they appropriate? Or do they fit in a way that's, again, consistent with how your workplace norms and standards function? I see Linda's point about culture. We could say this is sort of all embodied as one piece of culture. How do people groom themselves in terms of hairstyle, hair color? I have worked with people with blue hair, purple hair, red hair. That, again, it depends on the working environment. Are there any particular concerns with facial hair or someone's overall cleanliness level? These are tough things to talk about. And again, it's very difficult to be prescriptive. Yeah, people's perfumes or fragrances, makeup. I didn't add that to the list, but that's a good point. So again, I am not suggesting that you do or don't do things. What I am asking you to do is think about it in a way that goes back to this Venn diagram. What are the things that are acceptable in my workplace? What are the things that are important to me? And how can I make sure that those work together in concert with one another? And then someone put comportment, I think, or how you carry yourself. Do people tend to be more casual or relaxed in how they sit around? Because a lot of workspaces have very casual, I'll say, furniture. Ultimately, there may be more of a formality where people are sort of expected to carry themselves a certain way. And oftentimes people aren't even aware of whether or not they're slouching in their chair or they're jingling their coins in their pockets, especially during presentations or fidgeting. These are the kinds of things that you want to be asking some of your close colleagues about, who you think can give you some honest feedback around the way you're presenting in the workplace. Because this composite of your appearance and how you dress and how you look and how you groom and how you carry yourself all fit together into what becomes an element of your personal brand. So again, the point here isn't to say do this and don't do that. It's to ask, although I do have a do's and don'ts when it comes to communication at the end. There are universal norms in society. I think that's true to the point that's made, but it doesn't necessarily mean that your workplace is an exact derivative of society, right? So again, I think now that may make people feel, well, I'm not sure how that would work, but again, I think you have to be, as a quote unquote smart consumer, so to speak, thoughtful about, where are the areas where I can fit in and feel comfortable, and where are the areas that I would feel more comfortable standing out. So in addition to that, I'm going to move from appearance to this concept of boldness. And I think I have another little quiz for you to think about. I would say being bold and feeling comfortable being bold, which means to essentially show calm courage in the face of challenging situations, is a function of two variables looked at from two different directions. The first one is you. How skilled do you feel at your work? I feel good at my job. I can do my job. And then how confident are you in your abilities? And similarly, and we're using the backdrop of personal branding here, how do others view you? Do they view you as capable as well? And do they view you as reliable in the workplace? So what I would argue is, in the workplace, again, these maybe aren't things that we think about every day. These work into two variables that we would call your overall credibility is a function of your competence, that's your skill in your work, and the confidence that you have and other people have in you. So one's overall credibility, which I would say gives you permission to be bold or courageous in certain situations, is a function of your overall credibility, which comes from, again, being good at what you do professionally and having confidence in oneself. And in classes I've taught in the past, I've had oftentimes people say, I don't necessarily have the confidence I have at work. And that's something you can develop over time, but it also comes from feeling good about your abilities. Now, here's a little test for you. If you were to think about these two variables on a little graph, your confidence on the y-axis and your competence on the x-axis, how would you rate yourself? So do competence first, do the x-axis first, and then confidence second. So where would you plot yourself today? And just be honest with yourself, like, in my competence in terms of my job, and this is kind of an amalgamation of how I feel about my job and how other people perceive me in my work. What would I rate myself? You can go ahead and put it in the chat if you want. And the same thing in confidence, how confident I feel in my own abilities and the confidence that other people put in me. 5.5, that's fantastic. That's an ideal state. 6.7, you may be off the chart. I think you want to break it. Yeah, 5.4, 4.5, 4.3. So again, the purpose of this isn't to score you necessarily so you can benchmark against everyone else. It's to give you an honest assessment of how I feel and how I'm perceived in terms of my own competence and the confidence people have in me. And that goes back again to this notion of personal brand. So you can always work to become better at your job, and you can always work to project an image that you feel good about how you do your work. So boldness features into this. Now, where you want to be, we have a few 4.4, 5.5, 5.4 and the like, which is fantastic. So great job. But over time, you want to make sure you're working in a way to build your skills. That's what the 12 skills is about. And build your confidence so that you're in that upper right-hand quadrant, right? You're in the place where you're saying, I feel really good about my work. I think I'm good at my work. People recognize and acknowledge that I'm good at my work. And also, I feel like I can do things and people have confidence in me. So this idea of building this kind of trusted base is important. So in order to be bold, you have to have earned the trust of your colleagues. You have to have a reputation, which is somewhat synonymous with personal brand, as I mentioned at the outset, that you are someone that's able to do your work, do it well, keep your commitments, and follow through. That gives people a sense of, I can trust this person. She'll follow through and do the things that need to be done. It helps to be positive at work. There's an interesting, how can you be more confident if you're not competent in your job? So I would say it's a good question. You probably want to really work on being more competent in your job, because all of the boldness and all of the confidence of doing your job won't necessarily be there, or be somewhat feared if you aren't actually good at your job. People usually will find that out over time, that maybe you're not as skilled as you're projecting, and you don't want to be in that position. But you want to be positive. You want to demonstrate that, when situations arrive that require you to be calm or require you to step up and be courageous, you can do it. And that can be hard, right? They can be challenging. But that's why I go back to the point of, if you feel good in your abilities and confident, and other people have the confidence in you, and you're confident at that, that will enable you to actually be positive. You'll feel like I can do the things that, even if they're challenging. And you'll see as people get more senior in organizations, and some of you have no doubt experienced this, you'll be put into roles that will draw on your ability to work in unfamiliar circumstances. That's part of what leader development is all about. You don't want to be in a job over time that doesn't challenge you. So you will have to be pushing yourself in some cases out of your comfort zone. So there's a couple questions from Lisa on likability. I think likability is a function of some of these underlying elements. We talk about likability is one of the influence principles that we'll talk about later in the course. It's easier to get things done if people like you, and it's easier for people to like you if they can trust you. The question as to when is it important to be bold? I would say, again, you're getting a point of view here. So that's going to vary by your workplace, your position, the things that you're doing. I don't think I can say, well, you should be bold in these 5 situations. I think when circumstances arise that are challenging, when people are trying to figure out how to solve a problem, we talked about that last month, or thinking about how to forge a way ahead or build some consensus, that's when you probably want to have the ability to be influential in terms of articulating your expectations or what you would like to see happen. And that's where boldness, I think, features into that. And then lastly, making decisions. Big chunk of what you do as you get more senior in organizations, some of you do this already, is you make decisions. So am I comfortable making decisions, even if they're hard? Obviously, you want to make decisions that are data-based, research-based, where you consider other people's points of view. That's important. But when you do make a decision, do you feel at the given time you make the decision that your competence and your confidence have combined to make you feel comfortable saying, in the midst of some uncertainty, given what I've thought through and what I've discussed with my team, I'm confident and feel comfortable making this particular decision. So, but all these questions are really good and I think thought-provoking. And then the last on the ABCs, Laura and I try to make it simple: appearance, boldness, and communication is how you project. You can see, are you able to express your ideas confidently when you're speaking? I remember as a kid growing up, my father was an executive with it was Nabisco, the cookies and cracker company. It's Mondelez now. But he was an executive, and I remember he would give presentations, and that was back when they were they're still formal presentations. But I remember very vividly he would go in the basement of our home, and he would record himself giving the presentation, and then he would listen to it and then do it again. So what's the point? Yeah, your dad too, Nick. Okay. Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, I work for Nabisco as well. So the idea here is and my father was I'm biased, obviously. I thought he was a pretty good leader and he was pretty successful in his career, but I knew the method to the madness, right? When he got up and gave a great speech, it wasn't because he was just natural at giving speeches. He practiced, right? So some of these things, like communication in general, we can get better at through practice. Even if English is not your first language or whatever native tongue you're speaking in, you can use, I would say plain English is, that I contextualize it here to the North American market, so to speak. But whatever language you speak, you want to use terminology that's clear and direct and understandable for folks. You don't want to use too much jargon or sophistication. And one of the great things about recording yourself, although people really don't like doing it, is you catch things like, you catch you catch those kinds of filler words, which for many people, they're not aware they're using those words. So it can be super helpful to, whether it's for an interview or whatever you're doing, to record yourself, as painful it is, or have somebody record you and then listen. Pacing and pauses matter. You don't want to speak in one monotone, consistent, ongoing voice, right? It becomes difficult for people to hear. They don't follow the conversation, or they'll check out. So you want to use pacing and pauses and sometimes some silence to get people to think about things, right? So, and the inflection and the tone that you use, you want to vary too. All of these are elements of effective speech. And I didn't say this at the outset, but I spent some time in preparing for this discussion with y'all. There's lots of TED Talks out there on executive presence, and there's even TED Talks on executive voices. So my point is there's ample resources available if this is something you want to dig into further beyond just the articles or the book chapters, or if you went to the website to pull down the workbook. You want to look at people when you're talking. If I'm sitting here having a conversation with you, and I'm checking my phone now and see what's happening with March Madness, you're thinking, why isn't this person looking at me? If you, I'm imagining that you've all had an experience, or almost everybody, where you were talking to somebody and that person may have been senior to you. And while you're talking to them, they're distracted. They're doing something else. They're on their computer, they're on their phone, they're whatever it is. That doesn't instill confidence in people. Also looking down, looking away, those aren't particularly helpful. They don't communicate. So people have been asking RC in the chat about sincerity and humility and empathy. It doesn't feel like you're understanding what I'm trying to communicate to you if you're not paying attention to me. So that's something that you can practice and work on. It doesn't take a lot of effort, and we ought to be paying attention to people when they're doing those things. Sit up. I could be sitting back here in my chair like this, giving this presentation. I only see my head at this point. But if I sit up and I lean forward, you get a sense of this is a topic that I'm actually passionate about. I'm interested in. I want you to feel like you're getting the best that I have to share with you over the course of this, hour or so you're spending with us. So you want to be mindful of, and it's not just in sort of formal presentations, it's during meetings. Do you lean back a lot? Are you someone that fidgets? Do you play with your hair, or do you jingle with change in your pocket? Do you, and these are not the final definition of what behaviors could be distracting, but it can be useful to ask people, am I doing anything that is distracting or is causing people not to think about the message I'm giving, but thinking about the behavior that's happening at the same time I'm trying to give that message. And then ultimately, your level of engagement when you're communicating indicates how interested you are in the topic, how passionate you are about it. Like I had to give this presentation today. I have a bunch of other stuff to do. And that's one of my pet peeves. I'm here for this. As sometimes I've had students in my class or other people I worked with have gotten up and said, you listen, everybody, I wasn't even prepared for this presentation today. I didn't even know I was going to have to give it. I just, I threw some of these. I think to myself, well, why did you just tell everybody that? I'm not saying you should mislead them, but give it your best. Let people know that whatever the circumstances, you're there and you're giving that, being present, you're giving people 100% for the time that you're there. They sort of really need that from you, want that from you. And years ago, a colleague I worked with named Tom Hines was influential in my career. He was a business development person. And he had an interesting, and I never forgot this, I thought it was pretty useful. He said, in business development, people don't buy products or services, or in this case, if you're not in a business development role, we can say ideas from you. People buy them because you're engaged in them, because you're interested and passionate about your ideas. That's what matters. You're the one that gets them excited. So just to wrap up, and I want to pass it back over to Fran, given what we've talked about today, you've got some tools that will help you assess your personal brand. And ask someone who will be honest with you, whether it's a friend, be mindful of who you ask in the workplace. Can you video me and give me some honest feedback on these different elements of, do a presentation for 2 minutes and see how you do. You will find out some interesting things. Laura talks about a story where she did this in her class at Harvard, and someone wasn't even aware of how they were presenting from a dress standpoint. Attire standpoint. So spend some time if you really want to up your image and your personal brand. Think about what you look like today. Plan a couple of key changes and then make the change and follow through. That's really, really, really what it boils down to. So we are able to do these programs. If you like the things you're hearing about, love to see you back in May and April before that even. I'm happy to do these inside organizations, or even if you have questions, just reach out. I'm always happy to answer these, but these are certainly things that we can help people with both individually and in mass. So be thinking about that. Hopefully you found today valuable. I was delighted to have the chance to speak to you. This is a really interesting topic, especially today. And I am going to turn it back over to my esteemed colleague, Fran, at this point, who will wrap us up for the day. But thank you so much for being here. Please stay in touch with us at Brown. We'd love to get a chance to help you out in any way, shape, or form.
Thank you so much, Ed. What an incredible message and a lot to think about. And thank you to everyone who was able to join today and just so thoughtfully engaged in the chat. And before we jump in, I know we're running a little short on time. So before we switch over for question and answer, and just so you know, it's not too late. If you have any questions, feel free to submit them. But before we do that, I just want to switch over and get some input from everyone on some potential course offerings that we are exploring. So I have a poll, and if you were on the Lessons in Leadership webinar last month. This will look familiar. So give me 1 second and we will launch that. And so while you're reading through that and answering, let me just kind of walk you through it. So in this poll, we are looking for your feedback on 3 program concepts. So for each program concept, we'll ask you to use a scale from 1 to 5, where 1 is being that you would never enroll in this proposed program, and 5 being that you would definitely enroll. So for program concept number 1, this would be a course on leadership essentials. This course would consist of 3 3-hour sessions, so it would be very short and compact. The course would cover topics on communication, negotiation, and executive presence. So 1 topic for each of the 3 days. It would run Tuesday, Thursday, Tuesday. The times that we are looking at is 4:30 to 7:30 p.m. Eastern Time. So program concept number 2 is a course on branding yourself and your ideas. It would be a 4-week course that involved 2.5 hours of asynchronous work per week, along with 2 live sessions. So the topics for this would include unveiling personal values and vision, crafting your professional image, and delivering your message. So the live sessions for that, we're looking at 5 to 6:30 p.m. Eastern Time. And then lastly, concept number 3 is a course on AI, artificial intelligence, governance, and ethics. This course would consist of 4 1.5-hour live sessions offered over 2 weeks. The 4 modules covered would cover providing an overview of AI ethics, AI monitoring, auditing, and accountability, understanding AI regulation and legislation, and lastly, private sector efforts in AI. So let me just check to see where we are at with the poll. Thank you so much. We're just under 70%, so I'm just going to leave it open for another 10 seconds, and then we'll get over to question and answers. All right. And I'm just going to close up the poll now. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Thank you, everyone. Okay. So now for the good stuff. Let's see. Ed, do you want to stop sharing your screen?
Yes. Stop.
Thank you. And let me just bring up if there. All right. So thank you again for the questions that you've submitted. So first, Ed, how do you move from being an individual contributor to an executive leadership role in terms of developing your brand?
Yeah, there's probably a few steps in the middle there. So there's at least a couple of questions in there. One is sort of where I am in my career, and then working through, that's what the dartboard was for, is to figure out how to improve your skills in each of these areas, and everyone's at a different place developmentally. I think it probably helps to believe, I'll go back to that little diagram of competence and confidence. I think you want to work on your abilities, but you also want to work on projecting the confidence that your executive leadership material. I mean, I think we have some blog posts coming out on the topic that in order to achieve, you have to first believe, right? So you have to believe that you can get there and do that, and then have the skills behind it to actually make that happen. So I think working through your image, your presence, your communication, and then your sort of technical competencies, and then getting in a position where you can supervise other people, ideally, volunteering for those positions, having a personal brand statement that says, in 5 or 10 years, I want to be in this role, and then work towards that. I think having a bit of a plan behind that can be quite helpful.
Wonderful. Thank you. So I'm getting a lot of questions about how to deal with kind of imposter syndrome. So I'll just read one of those,
Sure.
but it's come up quite a bit. So 1, how does one handle and approach imposter syndrome? And 2, as a woman of color with natural curly hair, what changes in the workplace would have to transpire for people like me to be considered professional in various settings?
Well, these are good questions, and they're not easy questions to answer. And that's why I started with that diagram about your workplace and you. I do think that more progressive organizations are changing the workplace where you can be who you are and who you are naturally. You don't have to change yourself in an artificial way to be accepted. Now that's not a fast process. But I think it starts with assessing the environment that you're in and asking yourself, can I be successful in terms of who I am in this environment? And then if you are following the rules, so to speak, and formal rules and guidelines in that environment, then I think the question is, can you start feeling more comfortable in being who you are, recognizing it should be fitting in your workplace? Confidence comes from, thinking that you're and being good at your work and feeling like you're a colleague that is trustworthy and those things. But I do think you also really, it ends up feeling a little Pollyannish if you're not in an environment where people value that and value you for who you are. So I think finding it's kind of like finding the right place to put down your roots is really, really important. And then I think someone's natural abilities and desire will come out over time. But I don't think for a minute that that's easy, or that all workplaces are necessarily like that. I think we've gotten a lot better over the past few years, especially since the pandemic, but we still have a long way to go. But it's a great question. But I think part of the ABCs is also to look at other people and say, like, how much of what they're saying to me is brand image, or how much of what they're saying to me is really good content, good thinking. And I think, now you have this kind of ability to look at it through a set of lenses that help you sort of unpack things.
Great, thank you. Yeah, another theme that I'm seeing in the questions is around how to build gravitas, particularly if you tend to be more of like an introvert, or question. It says, as an engineer by training, I tend to be more detailed and less concise in my communication. Any suggestions on ways to improve structured communication?
Yep. Yeah, so these are great questions, and everyone has different background, whether a lawyer, an engineer. I started as an accountant. I think the important thing to remember overall is these are skills, meaning you can get better at them. The trick is, and it's not really a trick, you have to have a plan and work at it. If you're not someone that feels like you naturally are able to communicate with people effectively, watch some videos, I think I've told this story before, create some little vignettes that you can use in different situations that illustrate certain points that you want to make. I coached someone that took a very senior role, president role in a large multi-billion-dollar organization. And before the person took over, we crafted the person's background and leadership story in different pieces so that when they got asked things, they could, they were a little bit scripted, but they also came off as natural. So it goes back to that story I told about my father. Like, some of the stuff it's actually practiced. So I would encourage someone to think about, like, what are the kinds of common questions that I have or interactions and can I script those out? Can I practice them a little bit? And I think in the C part of the model, over time, if you work on that, you will get better at communication. It won't happen overnight, but you can improve your ability to communicate effectively if you work on it. I know, and I see some of the folks that are on this event, Laura and I have worked with them in the past, and they've gotten more effective at it. Like, yeah, engineers too. Like, it can happen for everybody if you work at it.
100%. So I think we have time for maybe one more. Have you ever seen situations where organizations or individuals put one's executive presence at risk? And if so, any suggestions on how to respond?
Yeah, so that's a really touchy subject. And I was talking with some colleagues yesterday about that, define what at risk is. So I really want to avoid being prescriptive in any way, shape, or form. I think the going back to the point I made about fitting in before you stand out, I've seen people that try to stand out before they fit in, and that's when I think you end up putting yourself in a bit of a risky position. Should you try that, and can you do it? That's up to you. But remember, unfortunately, perception is really what ends up, you're informing people's perceptions of you, for better or worse. And I think I'll hear sometimes, well, that's not fair. I should be able to do these things, and that's not right. And I don't disagree with that. But I think it goes back to what is it that you want to project at work? And you have to determine to what degree you want to be true to whomever you are. And only you can make that determination. But just be aware of the decisions that you make will factor into your personal brand, what people say about you when you're not around, for better or for worse. But it's also, I think, important to be in an environment where people are more accepting, where they're okay with people of, great levels of diversity, however diversity is defined. And I think we know more about the workplace today, and those are the workplaces that tend to perform better over time.
Mhm. Well, that brings us to the top of the hour. Thank you
Thanks,
so
Brad.
much, Ed. It was an incredible discussion, and thank you for everyone who submitted questions and engaged with the chat. So as promised, we'll make sure to send up a follow-up email with the recording to today's discussion, as well as a link to the slides. And then we also will be sending out a newsletter. I believe it's going out April 2nd on this topic. So there'll be a number of thought-provoking pieces in that mailing as well. So until then, we hope to see you at future lessons in leadership webinars and possibly in some of our School of Professional Studies classrooms. Thank you, everyone, and hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.
Take care.
Bye.